Hello and welcome to the Tech and Sports Podcast. Tech and Sports is a show about how technology is revolutionizing all of the major sports as well as health and fitness. You can find it on your podcast service of choice. My name is Alex Radu and I'm here with the extraordinary Mandy Kovacs.
Hello.
This week we discuss whether or not these Winter Olympics prove that athletes have peaked, plus all of the biggest news from the last week, new apps or wearables, and your weekly concussion update. But before we get to that, we would really appreciate it if you would review and rate the Tech and Sports Podcast on iTunes and Google Play or wherever else you get your podcasts from. It really does help us grow the show, and we really appreciate all the support so far. And with that, sit back and relax, because the Tech and Sports crew is entering the game. All right, Mandy, the news.
Alright, so first up is of course an Olympic story, because despite the closing ceremonies on Sunday, we're still not done with its tech quite yet. The USA women's hockey team have been wearing small motion sensors developed by the official timekeeper of the Olympics, Omega Timing. These sensors were attached to the backs of their jerseys throughout the tournament, and when combined with Omega's puck tracking camera capabilities, these sensors were able to track each player's number of shifts, passes, speed, acceleration, time on ice, and a whole bunch more. So this information was processed in less than 100 milliseconds and was able to be distributed to television broadcasts or on the stadium scoreboard within just a few seconds. So we've talked about similar tech in skiing, snowboarding, and bobsled before, but now that tech has finally hit the ice. And international hockey doesn't let coaches allow for on-bench access to this data, but its applications beyond the Olympics are really interesting because we've talked about it before that the NHL is planning on introducing its own tracking system for the 2019-2020 season, and it's looking for new partners to team up with, and Omega could very well be one of those partners with this technology.
Yeah, no, it's interesting to see that it's now finally starting. You've mentioned, the NHL is starting this. It's only going to continue to be happening in hockey, and it's cool to see that's finally happening.
Yeah.
We're going to be able to see, I doubt, honestly, that we'll ever be able to see a lot of these statistics. But I'm sure, maybe after season, they'll, put together, all the cool stats that they found throughout the season, or, from the last month or something like that. But this is going to be really cool to see.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, our next story will be something that we might come back to a little later on. Apparently, the British Olympic skeleton team has been using new high-tech suits in Pyeongchang that are so good that some of the other athletes have complained to the International Bobsleigh and Skeleton Federation. So these suits are highly aerodynamic and completely skin-tight with special drag-resistant ridges that were developed by scientists at the English Institute of Sport. The governing body did check out the suits and eventually announced that the suits don't violate any rules, but some of the other athletes aren't convinced because on the men's side, Great Britain won bronze, but the women achieved both gold and bronze. So it's a really interesting debate. Britain did win the gold in Sochi and Vancouver as well in the women's event, so it's not too different to have two medals in this one, but the men's side haven't reached the podium in more than a decade. So it's interesting how this might actually affect the results.
Yeah, it is interesting because what's going to happen here is either every team gets on board with these types of suits, or the federation is just going to have to ban them altogether. But I don't know. It is interesting because they do have this tradition of winning. So is it that out of the ordinary?
Only on the women's side, though.
Yeah, but it's not like on the men's side they won gold. They won bronze. They got onto the podium.
But again, this is a nanosecond type of sport.
That's fair.
And anything does help.
That is fair. Yeah. So they were legal for those Olympics. They were allowed to wear them. So
exactly.
You really can't necessarily complain too much about it because they were checked out and they were allowed to do it. We'll have to see, though, in the future if that is banned or continued. We always come back to the 2008 swimming bodysuits and how those were eventually banned. So
yeah, we'll definitely mention that more.
Yeah.
Yeah, and in similar news, too, the Canadian speed skating team has also added a little bit of innovation to its suits. The team suits are made of rubber, plastic, and Kevlar, but this year they have ceramic dots built into the sleeves that are about 1.5 millimeters wide that allow for more efficient airflow around the athlete. So the suits went through more than 20 hours of wind tunnel testing, and each one costs about $1,200 Canadian. But like the British skeleton suits, the speed skating governing body found no problems with these suits and say that they're completely legal, even though I think some people did have questions about it. Canada has won several medals in speed skating at these games, so clearly something has gone right. I don't know.
Yeah, it's the same concept, though. They were allowed to use them.
Exactly.
So if they're allowed to use them, you can't really call cheating because they were ruled to allowed to use them. So, yeah, it's either everyone else is going to get on board with the same tech, and that's going to level out the playing field, as with most sports technology, as we're going to see, or they're just going to be banned, and they're going to have to go back to not using that stuff. Exactly. But either way, we'll have to see next Olympics.
Absolutely. All right, now moving away from the Olympics, we have news that the Brooklyn Nets and the New York Islanders have added a fast pass entrance to the Barclays Center thanks to a partnership with Identigo by Ademia, an exclusive provider of TSA PreCheck. So we've previously covered how the New York Jets and the New York Giants added the TSA PreCheck to MetLife Stadium last year, and now the Brooklyn-based teams are also on board as well. So the system lets fans enroll in the program to get expedited security clearance so that when they go to games, they can skip all the entrance lines and all the screening checkpoints.
My kind of question about this is, for instance, like, so we live in Toronto, and when you go to the ACC for a Raps or Leafs game, it's not like the security checkpoints are that heavy. Like, it's like,
no,
it's really like, it's like, I mean, it's really nothing. Like, it's a 30-second line at most times.
It depends, too, though, on what entrance you go in, because I'm thinking of at the Rogers Center where the Blue Jays play, and, like, those lines on game days, like, you could be in that for, like, 30 minutes easily on, like, a weekend game. So I can see this almost being more effective at, like, baseball stadiums where they have, like, 50,000 person stadiums, right?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, no, so I guess it really does depend then on the stadium. But I think what the cool part about this story is going to be not necessarily the added security part, but I guess then skipping lines. If you can skip 30 minutes of time, then that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, for sure. All right, and last but not least, a company called Skydio has unveiled an autonomous artificial intelligence-powered drone that could offer athletes a hands-free approach to training and give them new content opportunities. So the company, which counts Kevin Durant as one of its investors, because of course Kevin Durant is super into this stuff, the company says that the 4K drone called R1 uses AI to power its 13 cameras to predict how people it's filming move so that it can maneuver around in the air at high speeds without any input from humans. Skydio says a runner, for example, would be able to use this to film themselves from a bird's eye view as they run on tracks or through forests to see where they might work best, or a tennis player could use the drone to review their plays and really improve their techniques. And for athletes that create high-action content, like Canadian snowboarder Mark McMorris, for example, this could offer them a new and probably safer way to get their footage for some of those videos. It doesn't come cheap, however. The drone retails at about $2,500 US, so it's not for your average person, that's for sure.
Yeah, it's definitely not too affordable, but it is cool because the idea of being able to, like, watch yourself as you're running through a forest and track your progress and then be like, maybe that route would be faster. It could just add to not only the like the performance aspect, but it also just the entertainment aspect. Like that's I mean, honestly, like running's fairly boring. So if you were, able to add some excitement to that through this, that'd be pretty cool.
I just love that it's AI powered too, right? Because I mean, right now drones, for the most part, you have to control it yourself, but just having something follow you around, learning and using AI, like, it's a little creepy, a little futuristic, I think, but it's very cool.
Yeah, I do also wonder how reliable it is.
I don't know. And like, what if you run extra fast and it loses you?
Yeah, like what happens if like you lose your drone like halfway? And
I don't know.
know.
Is there a callback button or like a signal, like a bat signal?
Like does it just maybe automatically fly back to its base? I imagine that's what it is.
I don't know.
But okay.
Too many questions. But anyways, that's it for the news today. Thanks for listening.
All right, and now it's on to apps and wearables. So today we're going to start with Norway, because as we know, Norway has been killing the competition in cross-country skiing at this year's Winter Olympics, and the country isn't looking to step down from that throne anytime soon. The Norwegian Olympic Federation, as well as Swiss Ski and Cross Country Canada, have teamed up with a tech company called ProSkita that creates performance tracking ski pole grips. These ski poles will give skiers the ability to track and measure performance, as well as compare themselves to different athletes in real time through a mobile app, and same way every other wearable works. We talk a lot about how athletes of all sports will be finding ways to incrementally improve performance, and this seems to be the latest way for skiers. And then ProSkita is currently accepting reservations for the upcoming 2018-2019 winter season, and there are limited ski poles available. So if you are interested in this, or you're a pro skier or something like that, then you might want to start taking advantage now.
Yeah, I love the fact that this is built into ski poles, because that's something obviously that every skier uses anyways, and it's not another device that you have to wear or add to your clothing. It's literally something that these athletes use all the time. So that's what I love about it.
Yeah, it'd be cool to see the equipment instead of adding to equipment, especially in sports like hockey where there's already so much equipment, but replacing existing equipment with stuff that already has sensors in it.
Yeah, build in sensors into hockey sticks. Why not?
Yeah, exactly. All right, next up we have a Toronto-based startup called Somnitude, that is trying to help athletes with jet lag. So the startup, which was founded by Amol Rao, partnered with Canada's freestyle ski team to alleviate some of the jet lag athletes are experiencing in South Korea, which is 14 hours ahead of Toronto. Somnitude has created special glasses that block out blue light before bed, the type of light that comes from laptops and cell phones, and supposedly can delay sleep cycles. Rao says that the glasses should be worn a couple of hours before going to sleep, and the startup will be working with those Canadian athletes for the next 6 months following the Olympics to track their sleep and improve the glasses. Ultimately, the startup Ooh, okay, Don, you're gonna have to edit this. It's just one sentence too.
No.
All right. Ultimately, the startup's target audience will be athletes and business travelers. So what's really cool about this is that I really love understanding all the new sleep tech that's coming. And this is still super early on. Like, we're not going to be able to get this. This is just all testing phases and stuff like that. But, hey, I mean, we travel a lot for work. Yeah. So this would be awesome for jet lag.
Yeah, I actually really like this idea. A little weird that it's supposed to be warm a couple hours before going to bed. I feel like that's a little bit awkward. But, I mean, the idea is great because, I mean, all our phones now have the night mode. And I set mine to come on at, like, 9 p.m., right? So that when I eventually go to bed, like, 2 or 3 hours after that, like, I don't have any sort of blue light happening. And I have found that it helps me go to bed quicker. So, I mean, especially for athletes, I'm pretty sure the ski team was one of the first few events to happen, right? So, of course, they were definitely jet-lagged. So, yeah, it worked. We won medals.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so last story takes us to the University of British Columbia, where a team of researchers has been working on low-cost, stretchable sensors for wearables. So while this isn't new tech that you could buy right now, we could start to see these techniques from UBC adopted in wearables out there already. Essentially, the goal was to create sensors that could stretch, be flexible, and be a reasonable size while still having the required sensitivity, performance, production cost, and robustness to make it feasible. Ultimately, this would allow for better sensors on wearables overall that could provide more accurate feedback. To demonstrate this tech, UBC engineers created a knee band, wristband, and glove. The wristband monitors heartbeats by sensing the pulse of the artery, while the glove and knee band are designed to capture the entire range of motion of muscle movements while walking, running, sitting down, and standing up. So what's cool about this is, again, this is another kind of one of those hypothetical type things. It's not something out there that we can buy, but it is something that's going to improve the technology that we have now and are looking for, because that is part of the problem still, is that not all wearables, they don't have, infinite amount of power or, flexibility and such like that. So if they can make sensors easier and work better and, be more adaptable, then that can also help us with wearables and also make them cheaper. Right.
Well, it comes down to what we were talking about with the ski pole just a few minutes ago, right? Like, it just incorporating these technologies and these wearable type of things, or integrating them into things that we use every day or that athletes use every day. Like, that's the way you're going to grow this industry for sure.
Exactly. All right, and that's it for apps. So now we're moving on to concussions. Every day, a large portion of athletes with a history of repetitive head trauma are battling with a progressive neurodegenerative brain disease called CTE. Symptoms of CTE include blurred vision, dementia, depression, headaches, memory loss, and mood swings. There is no cure, and it only gets worse with time. This is the number one issue in sports, so every week we'll be updating you on what is happening in the world of concussion prevention. So while there isn't any big news this week on the concussion front, Consumer Reports did talk about what parents can do in the realm of concussion prevention with their kids, which and this comes to us via an article on Katu. Essentially, Consumer Reports is suggesting that parents can talk to coaches and sports leagues about player safety and what they are doing about concussion prevention. So further than that, Consumer Reports medical director Orly Avitzer says that parents need to be active in regards to their child's health. For instance, if you think your kid has received a concussion, pull them out of the game. From there, be active around the recovery process, become familiar with the symptoms of nausea, headache, confusion, dizziness, and memory problems. So while this isn't exactly a groundbreaking idea from Consumer Reports, it's important for us to help bring awareness to the parents of kids playing contact sports. My parents, for instance, never would have known to be wary about concussions, and getting parents on board to protect their kids while they play sports is important. A difference between pro sports and child leagues is that the amount of personnel watching the players. Most teams just have a coach, maybe an assistant or two as well. They don't have full staffs, and thus it's easier to miss potential signs of a concussion on big teams like in hockey or football. But as a parent, you're watching your kid. So pay attention, and if you see something you don't like, take them out of the game.
That's an interesting point about the parents, though, because I know... Like, I played contact sport, well, I guess soccer, I don't know if that counts as contact, but I played soccer as a child, and I got hit to the ground, and I got hit in the head a couple times, and if my parents ever saw that and were like, oh, you have to come out now because you might have concussion, I would be horrified. Not only because I wanted to keep playing, which I know is stupid, but I guess children are kind of dumb, but like, that's embarrassing though for your parents to pull you out, no? Like, I totally understand it on the coach's side of you, because yes, you're kind of, as a child, you are in their care throughout whatever 2 or 3 hour game, but having the parents on the sidelines have that kind of power, I don't know.
I mean, I think it's necessary power, because it's almost like if I'm watching my kid get wrecked and then I see that he's not, like, you know, walking around or doing something that he normally does because you are familiar with your child, then you could just be like, hey, my kid's not okay, take him out.
In extreme circumstances like that, where you get hit down and then you kind of you're walking around all woozy and can't walk in a straight line, sure. But if you just get hit in the head, I feel like you're gonna get some of those like mama bear type parents that are like, oh no, they fell down, we got to take you out of sports now for the rest of your life.
Yeah, which then kind of brings to an interesting point though of what do sports leagues for children really have to discuss. They have to maybe come up with rules and regulations around this type of thing.
That's a good point.
You know, a coach might just be like, no, he's fine, but then like maybe the kid's not. And you know what? Yeah, it's embarrassing, but I'm sure that embarrassment will fade if there is actually a concussion.
No, that's definitely fair. And I mean, not to play this card too, but that definitely is the mentality in a lot of boys' leagues too, right? Like if a boy gets hit down, their coach is probably like, nah, get up, you're fine. Yeah. Go keep playing.
Exactly.
Which, I mean, you see that mentality in sports right now across the world. And that's how we're in this situation now.
Yeah, and it's not necessarily this idea of, oh, it's not manly because you're coming out. It's like, well, hey, you don't want to have brain trauma when you're 14 years old.
No, not fun.
Or younger. So this is definitely something to keep in mind. It's definitely a conversation that, you know, parents around the world, you know, with their kids playing sports should be having.
Absolutely. So now moving into our discussion topic, today we're again focusing on the Olympics, given that they wrapped up on Sunday. So there's been a New York Times article that's been making the rounds on social media and causing a bit of a stir that's saying that we've essentially reached peak human ability and we're basically at the limit of how much further we can progress in athleticism. So the article says that after nearly 100 years of constant improvement in the Olympics, we've plateaued in the last couple decades. So obviously, today's debate topic is whether the 2018 Winter Olympics prove that athletes have peaked physically. So I'll start it off. I'll kind of give you a little bit of a recap of the article. So it studied the history of speed skating and points out that while there has been significant improvement in athlete time since the mid-1900s, since 2005, progress has basically plateaued. So researchers also found similar patterns in many other sports, including the 800-meter sprint, high jump, shot put, cycling, weightlifting, and even swimming. So that's not to say that records aren't being set anymore, but it's at a much slower pace and by much smaller margins. So it's basically saying that with all that we know about nutrition and training and even the importance of sleep, plus of course more resources going into Olympic sports, that it's basically made everyone great, but whoever wins is just a little bit greater, if that makes sense to anyone. So in 1968, for example, the long jump record was broken by 2 whole feet. But in 2017, the only speed skating record broken was from a Russian who broke the decade-old record by only 0.0 seconds. So, I mean, I know that that's comparing 2 different sports, but it just kind of shows how slim those world and Olympic records really are in this day and age. And as we've said before, too, so many sports now come down to millisecond finishes, and we're not just imagining it. So the sports director of U.S. speed skating was quoted saying that the time gaps between the top 10 finishers in every event has been getting smaller, and he says that we believe that we're approaching the human limit. And so this New York Times article goes beyond sports as well. So it points out that the average U.S. male height has increased every year, but it plateaued after 1980, which is signals that we've actually reached the limit for human bodies in general, not just sport. And the Times article isn't the only one saying this either. So data published in the journal Frontiers in Physiology concludes that yes, after decades of pushing our bodies, both sexes have basically plateaued since 1980. And without going through every single record broken at every Olympics in the last century, it is pretty obvious that they've declined in the last 30 years. I mean, you can even look at figure skating. So to win a medal in the men's program now, you basically need to do a quad jump, which wasn't even attempted in Vancouver 2010, just 7 years ago, or I guess 8 years ago now. But now there's talk about the quint jump. But scientists are saying that it's virtually impossible because you can't actually extend the time that the skater must remain airborne to complete five rotations. So I don't know. This is a really interesting topic because, I mean, the facts are kind of saying, yes, we have plateaued over the last couple decades. And yes, it seems that we've reached human limits. But I mean, as we've talked about so many times when it comes to technology and to the materials and the clothing that these athletes wear, I don't know how much that is true.
You see, I don't know if it's this Olympics that we've peaked. I mean, I definitely think that it's inevitable that we're on its way to kind of reaching that like peak, like, you know, human physical form until like there are going to be, I mean, obviously there's always going to be certain athletes that are like just bred for the sport that are, you know, best of their class, you know, freaks of nature type things. But I don't know. My counter to this is still that we're still diving into a bunch of these areas that don't necessarily involve adding technology to bodysuits or equipment. For instance, in the products update, I talked about the blue block glasses that will help athletes deal with jet lag and sleep better. Like, that's brand new tech. Like, that's still being discovered. So tiny things like that. And then I always like to use LeBron in these cases. The dude is a health nut who has poured millions and millions into his body, resulting in one of the largest consecutive NBA streaks in history. He's 33, and we're not expecting him to slow down at any point because he has focused so much on his body, which arguably looks better today than it did a decade ago. So I think that we can totally argue that human bodies are not going to be changing so much more, especially as we are super into nutrition and training and all that stuff. But just look at the NHL and all those kids that are dominating so early. Athletes growing up now will be the first to have a significant portion of their lives with a focus on these tiny aspects of just whatever sport that they're in. So I expect that beyond technology, we still have ways to go before we get truly stagnant. Because right now, it's different than, you know, a lot of the players in the, you know, 90s or even, you know, 2000s when they were like 20 in 2005 or something like that. They didn't grow up with necessarily all of the access to a lot of the training methods and nutrition and all that stuff. But as that becomes more readily accessible, I think it's just going to make more people like that, and it's going to bring out more people. So I still think that we're working towards something. I don't think we peaked yet.
Yeah, it's interesting because I would agree with the article based on the facts that it says that we have reached human capacity, but you're right, like by adding technology and all of these different aspects to it, it does change the game. Like look at the NHL, like you said, like all of these kids are so much faster because they started at that point where there's an emphasis on training and all that sort of stuff. But going back to the Olympics though, the one thing I did note that kind of supports this Times article is, this is by no means a factual thing, but from what I've watched, I have not seen an Olympic or world record broken other than Tessa Virtue and Scott Moyer's ice dancing, whatever you want to call it, dance, where they reached a record. But that is a completely subjective sport. You know, like I haven't seen any world records broken in any of the technical sports, like speed skating or anything this year. And I feel like those are very well publicized. Like, I'm just pointing that out. I mean, I have not fact-checked that. I could be very wrong. But, I mean, you would hear about those situations. And we haven't this year.
Yeah, I think with those, it's more so right now, we just don't have any, like, I mean, there's no, like, huge speed skater, to my knowledge, that is, like, dominating the tour. So to speak. There
was the Sven Kramer from the Netherlands, but again, he didn't do well this year.
Yeah,
he's done.
Well, yeah, but I mean, he's also in the decline of his career,
right?
So it's also maybe it's just right now we're also in a point where, you know, there just isn't like a leading person like Usain Bolt or Michael Phelps. Like I feel like we're kind of almost there's too much in the Summer Olympics. We in the last 10 years we've seen two of the greatest, one of the greatest swimmers and one of the greatest runners of literally all time.
Yeah.
If not of all time. Or some of the greatest Olympians of all time. And we haven't really seen that in the Winter Olympics. So I think maybe it's just we are a little, we've seen the Summer Olympics treats us too well.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I also kind of think that this, too, is, like, the transition year. This is 2018 really is all of the old kind of legacy athletes who don't necessarily like the technology aspect of sports versus the young and up-and-comers like you see in snowboarding. Like, the kid who won the snowboarding slopestyle is, like, 16 or 17 years old. Yeah. Like, that's crazy. But you're getting those kids that are of this technology generation that like that aspect. So I feel like maybe in the next one, which I believe is in Beijing, in 2022, that'll be, like, you're going to have a whole new crop of athletes that are much younger that care about that side of things. So maybe we will see more records broken because of the technology going forward.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. All right, well, that wraps up our discussion for today. Thanks, everyone who has been listening. This has been fantastic. Again, if you want to follow us on Twitter, our handle is ITB Tech and Sports, or our personal accounts, I'm at Mandy V. Kovacs, and Alex is at Alex T. Radu. So thanks for listening, and please, if you give us a like or rating on iTunes, wherever else you listen to our podcast, that would be awesome. Thank you.